Zach Servideo here from Boston Speaks Up. I'm here with my friend and the vice president and business partner manager at Fidelity for startups, Kristen Craft. Kristen, how are you today?
I'm great, Zach. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I was just telling you before we went live. I just shifted from hanging out with an 11-month-old, not the one over my shoulder, but looks strikingly similar to her older sister at this age. It's been fun over at the Servideo household with a 6-year-old and almost 1-year-old. The 6-year-old's been a good helper.
Love it.
But yeah, it's been nice. It was a good holiday season. It's the start of 2024. Before we dig into things, did you have a good holiday break and excited for the new year?
Yes, totally. Lots of good like family time and, time hiking outside in Vermont. It was great.
Oh, that's lovely. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, for listeners, this is cool because this is the first sort of revisit podcast with the guests we've had on before, and I kind of, as I mentioned, like we've become friends. I think from your time in previous roles and getting a chance to meet you and working very closely with supporting the startup community in Boston. It's been a couple years since we chatted. I'm just ground listeners and readers in sort of what the last year or so has been like. It's been a turbulent sort of economic climate. Um, you landed at Fidelity in this Fidelity for Startups role, and really advanced a lot of initiatives that previously have been sort of a staple of how you've shown up in the market. So if you could just share a bit of sort of just insights and what's happened in the past year, and then sort of some of the excitement about your specific role at Fidelity today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the past year has been an interesting one, to say the least, for founders, especially. The economic climate has been pretty choppy. The fundraising climate has been extremely slow. Even later stage founders who are thinking about IPO, in many cases, they are delaying that IPO process because the IPO climate has been so slow and very unpredictable. It's been a weird time. I think there is a silver lining, however, which is that this is a moment in time where founders are finding themselves recalibrating in a really interesting way. So, business fundamentals have always been important, but they are more important right now than they've ever been before. And what I mean by that is founders all of a sudden are thinking about things like generating revenue, bringing on early beta customers, fostering customer retention and fostering customer lifetime value. And don't get me wrong, these things have always mattered, but during this kind of gangbusters phase of fundraising in late 2020, early 2021, those things mattered less. And I think that was in some ways a negative thing because it fostered some bad habits and it prompted some founders to take their eyes off the ball, and to ignore those business fundamentals, because ultimately, like, generating revenue is the most important thing. So I think that the silver lining of the phase that we are in right now and of the past year, which has been tumultuous, is that founders have been more focused than ever on those business fundamentals, which will serve them so well in the long term because they are building more steady, predictable, reliable businesses. And it tends to serve them well when it comes to fundraising, because ultimately the best companies are still able to raise, and they are able to do so more easily when they can show those metrics, and those business fundamentals that help give investors a sense of confidence and conviction.
That's great. Well said. I want to double click on business fundamentals, like maybe example or two, and then talk a little bit about some of the things sort of that you're doing in ways that kind of founders and startups can kind of tap into the resources Fidelity provides. What is an example? And I was kind of appreciate you going back and forth in the pre-podcast Q&A. I think one example of a fundamental seems like sort of being more prudent with sort of the organization of the financials. But can you give example or two or three of like what some of those fundamentals look like that are just prudent in any economy, but particularly prudent in sort of like a shaky economy?
Yeah, so I'll dig a little bit deeper into sort of the revenue side, and then I'll dig into sort of company operations, cap table management, like preparing to raise. So on the revenue side, right now the smartest founders are making sure that every single dollar they deploy is going towards revenue, like generating revenue or preparing to generate revenue. And that is a contrast to what we were seeing 2 years ago, let's say, when people were spending money on crazy stuff, stuff that was like a real crapshoot. Like they oftentimes didn't know what was going to work. I buying blimps, buying bill, like I don't know,
Yeah.
things that
Big
they
like
didn't
marketing experiments types of things.
yeah, and like don't
Yeah.
get me wrong, as a former startup person, a long time startup person myself, like I
Yeah.
love experimentation. But what
Yeah.
I was seeing during that phase is that a lot of founders were experimenting in ways where they were never going to get data back about whether it was working. And I'm not a fan of that type of experimentation. Like I believe that every experiment should have, some sort of hypothesis that you are proving or disproving. And if you are deploying a dollar, especially of like other people's money, you should be doing so responsibly with an eye towards like, was this a good use of money that will, and can I get the conviction that I should either do this again in the future or not? And we were not seeing that. Whereas now, all of a sudden, the best founders are making sure that every dollar they deploy, will help them move towards revenue or revenue growth. And if they're using it for experiments, that they are running those experiments in a really like sort of responsible and scientific way where they are able to validate or invalidate that it was a good use of money. So that's, what I see on the sort of business fundamentals from a revenue perspective. And then looking internally in terms of business operations and business growth. And again, like I think this is a moment in time where this is, was always important, but is more important than ever. Is around running a tight ship with your company. So, right now, given, we can talk about this more later, but given the space that we are in and the product that we have around cap table management and equity management, and a data room, and just like brief sidebar in case folks are not familiar with this, your cap table or capitalization table is the single source of truth about who owns some percentage of your company. So perhaps you and your co-founder own big chunks of the company, your early investors own some of the company, maybe your early executive hires are given a portion of the company or given options in the company. So that cap table is the single source of truth around who owns what. At the same time, or sort of a corollary, is the data room. And the data room is where you keep all of your documents that back up and verify those ownership positions in the company, options, grants.
So we're talking like founders agreement, operating agreement, like those agreements that are countersigned that are then reflected on the cap table.
Exactly. Even things like offer letters that you make to employees tend to live in your data room. Yep. And so, though the cap table, the data room, those things have always been important, but they're particularly important right now because when a founder is fundraising, right before they close their round, they will go through a due diligence process. And, lawyers will look through your data room, your cap table with a fine-tooth comb. And if they find inconsistencies or errors, that grinds everything to a halt. It will really slow down your ability to close a round. It can cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. And I think arguably most dangerous, it can really erode trust and erode that relationship that you have with your investor. It certainly doesn't instill confidence if they discover that you're, arguably the most important facet of your business, like who owns it, is, a dumpster fire. So, those things have always been important, but they're more important than ever right now because fundraising is slow. So if you are in a really fortunate position to be generating revenue, to be closing a round with some investors, you certainly don't want to find that process disrupted at the 11th hour because you have a messy cap table or because you have a disaster of a data room. And that's one of the big things that we are trying to solve here at Fidelity for startups with our product shoebox, just ensuring that founders never are caught off guard, never encounter any nasty surprises during that due diligence process.
Interesting. I want to I just thought of a question, and I don't know if this is the right framing for it, but I want to talk about busy versus messy cap table. And so historically, maybe interchangeably too much, I've heard both. And I think a bit, but a busy cap table is like a lot of people on a cap table. And I'm curious your perspective. a well organized, busy, many people, like lots of founding team members getting some skin in the game or an investing schedule to have some bit of ownership. If well organized, is a busy cap table a bad cap table from a ability to have a smooth transaction versus like a messy cap table where it's just disorganized? I'm sort of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question, Zach. So you're spot on. A messy cap table is always a bad thing. Like that, it is a liability to your relationship, to your budget in terms of legal fees, to your time because you're going to eventually have to clean that up. So that's always a bad thing. But a busy cap table, having a lot of folks on your cap table, comes with some upsides and some downsides. So on the upside front, there are benefits to having a lot of investors. It's an interesting signal to others that you have a lot of folks in your corner, that a lot of people believe in you. That you've been able to build relationships with so many individuals who want to write you a check, and you've been able to present a compelling story to those folks to the degree that they are willing to put their own money behind your success. So that's one of the upsides of having a lot of investors. But admittedly, there are downsides as well. First of all, if they want to constantly ask you questions or meet with you to hear about your latest developments, or they have concerns, all of a sudden you have many people who want to put a bug in your ear about their opinion, and sometimes those might be helpful conversations, but sometimes they might not, and they might distract you from where you are trying to focus. And I think another sort of similar not risk, but downside potentially, is just from an operational perspective, it creates more work for you. When you need to communicate with your investors, like it is just more communication that you have to do. So just sort of operationally speaking, you are taking on more work. There certainly are ways to solve for that with templated communications. Like that is something that we really help founders do efficiently and effectively. But no matter what, anytime you have more cooks in the kitchen, it just introduces organizational complexity, which, creates more noise, creates a little bit more work, can sometimes create distraction.
Yeah, that's good stuff, and I feel like it's probably a similar answer. So in terms of like non-investors on the cap table, like strategic advisors, right? Like your startups bring in corporate development advisor, and as opposed to paying them that that large consulting fee or whatever, or a salary, they're going to give them some equity in exchange for their some channel pipeline to scale the business, right? We see this a lot. And if managed well through a platform like Shoebox, is how much have you experienced sort of when investors come in that are looking at like a later round, if they see a bit of a busy cap table and from a non-investor perspective, is that a strong deterrent? Is it circumstantial? Just curious, like because I think that's an area like where I'm sure you all do, but like that's an area where advice is really important, because I can't name a startup I've worked with that doesn't have surprise advisors
Yeah.
that got some piece of equity like early stage. It's like, oh, that person owns 2% of your company. Like they don't do anything. So just curious, like any comments on that?
Yeah, I do not hear many investors looking askance at having, advisors on your cap table, because again, like it's an important signal that others have faith in you and in your vision, and that they're eager to help. And I think another sort of upside specifically of those types of advisors who may have some equity in the company, is if those people have industry expertise, have connections, each of them is a node, a hub of connectivity that if you are managing that relationship correctly and to best effect, like you can leverage.
Yeah.
You can rally them for help in bringing on early customers and building out your pipeline. You might be able to leverage them when it comes to hiring. I think that investors recognize that if they're the right people, they can be an incredible asset to your growth
Great.
potential.
I love that answer. I love that answer. And also from an investor perspective, an investor coming in later, like say there's some great advisors in at pre-seed and seed stage, and they're doing a Series A round. I mean, the investors are going to sort of carve out the amount of the pie that they are warranted based on the valuation and the amount they're investing. So, um, the how many or how few additional folks are involved, like it's it's not like it's not important, right? And in the best case scenario, like there's more people involved because more people believe in the company, and there's
Yeah,
more people with skin in the game and an interest in putting efforts in to make the company successful. So
exactly.
cool. I'm glad I think that messy versus busy topic is a good. That's a good. I feel like that's a good theme. To kind of I'll personally take away from this conversation and share that with a lot of founders I talk to, because I think it helps draw a line and sort of like what's okay and what isn't.
Yeah, and it's a
So
question
really
that comes
appreciate
up a
that.
lot, so I'm glad you
Yeah,
asked.
cool. So let's like double click on maybe I know you have a lot of examples, but let's talk about the work you're doing right now at Fidelity for startups, and the different types of things that you're supporting in ways that entrepreneurs, maybe just with ideas, startups with a bit of an MVP, investors. How are you bringing them all together?
Yeah. So, I guess just to set the stage, probably many folks know Fidelity. And one of the things that I love about Fidelity is sort of the things that we are known for, the things that we are most respected for, namely like great products, incredible sort of long-term relationship, an eye towards really supporting our clients in myriad ways, and always being there for them. I mean, that comes through in our incredible NPS results. I love reading NPS and sort of customer feedback data, just because it really, it's just so lovely to see that the work that everybody here kind of puts into building those relationships and supporting those relationships is appreciated and adds value to people's lives. And then last, just sort of our place in the ecosystem. I mean, we are a really well known, well respected, capable, you know, company that people have, that has inroads in so many different parts of the economy. Coming back to Fidelity for Startups, it's really exciting to think about how we bring all of those attributes to bear in support of founder success, and seeking to do so in very similar ways. So on the product side, I'm so proud of our shoebox product. I think it is the best cap table and equity management solution out there. We've worked really hard to make sure that it is almost foolproof, so you don't have those nasty surprises during the due diligence process that we talked about. We have some incredible modeling tools that helps founders anticipate how equity positions will change in subsequent raises. So, the product and engineering and design teams here have worked hard to build and to continue building an incredible product. I love showing it off to people. Um, Additionally, I think that we have worked hard to do so much on top of that in service of a long-term relationship. So, we're not in it for the short term with founders. Like we are in it because we want to support the next generation of innovators and change makers. And we want to be there in their corner a year from now, a decade from now, a generation from now, even, because that is what Fidelity does really well. And that is what we are known for. I have many conversations with founder. Recently I was talking with a founder who's like, hey, like I really need to figure out my wealth management strategy. Like I don't necessarily know what I'm doing with XYZ. Like, can you help? And I might not have all the answers, but there are so many people at Fidelity here who are so expert here that connecting those individuals puts that founder in the best possible position.
That's cool.
Similarly, I was talking with a founder a couple of weeks ago who's like, hey, I'm thinking about IPOing in 18 to 24 months. Like, I don't even know what I don't know. This is my first time doing this. Like, help me figure this out. And so I've been able to identify various folks at Fidelity who have expertise in different facets of that IPO process. And so given just the breadth of experience and expertise that exist at Fidelity, we really are able to step in and be a trusted partner for almost any financial question or problem or opportunity that might arise for a founder, whether they're really early and just incorporating, or whether they are preparing to IPO or have IPO'd in the past. So I think that that sort of long-term relationship piece is sort of the second element. And then the third and final element I'll touch on around our connectivity, in the world of finance, in the world of business, is unparalleled. And we are seeking to leverage those connections in support of founder success. So I host a lot of events here in Boston, some also in New York City and San Francisco with colleagues there. We do a lot of online events and ones in other cities as well. Really, we're trying to show up and have a presence and be helpful, most of all, in all of these different places where founders are building and growing incredible businesses. And I think that we have the opportunity to play a big role in that startup's trajectory by fostering this community and fostering this connectivity. So, for example, there's the founder that I've known for a while, who, she's come to a number of events. And I ran into her recently. She was like, oh, Kristen, like, I've been meaning to let you know that this event you invited me to, I met so-and-so. Via that person, I met my lead investor. I also met some folks who I am bringing on as advisors. And like, that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't shown up at an event. That wouldn't have happened if Fidelity had not created the space for those introductions to happen. So, I'm a big believer in serendipity. But I also think that, various people, organizations can create the opportunity for serendipity to happen. I think we can put a finger on the scale in support of a startup success by creating those opportunities and those moments of connectivity.
I love it. Let's talk a little bit about sort of just the landscape of sort of innovation and just clusters of innovation in Boston and the New England region. I'm curious, like, how much, like, I was just talking to a buddy of mine who's a creative director at a big agency in Boston, and we were talking about how, like, every department had, because I'm always trying to, I'm a small little consulting firm, and I'm always trying to, how are the bigger sort of like consultancies and agencies navigating like AI? It's like every department, it's like from the leader to the division sort of leaders, whether it's the creative department or the copywriting department. It's like this is just in the marketing sort of creative side. It's sort of like everyone needs their AI strategy. As a business, Valley Creation Labs has been leaning in on AI. We're experimenting with one tool right now I really like from a serial entrepreneur buddy of mine. It's his third rodeo. He's exited well the last two, so I like his chances. We've like customized a mascot that we're going to embed on our site that's going to sort of, we fed it and created like a VCL brain, and it's just really, it's really neat. And also Fidelity is supporting a report on artificial intelligence and machine learning in the New England region that a group of analysts that I work closely with, Galen Moore, Joe Maglita, are working on right now. We're releasing that later this month. It's going to be out sort of around the time we get this podcast out. So I'd love to double click on AI and just sort of how Fidelity sort of like understanding it's one of the biggest sort of innovation sort of areas of our time is supporting founders to ensure that if they're not building an AI company, which is okay, they have sort of AI strategies for leveraging AI, because there are many number of sort of tools in sort of that category that can help supercharge the individuals that are sort of working within startups. So curious kind of where you want to go with that topic a little bit, but I've I've definitely appreciated Fidelity's leaning in on the AI front, obviously through that report that will come out, but it's not just that you're up to. So I'm just curious, sort of like your general thoughts, how you're helping companies from like an education and support standpoint.
Yeah. So I'm so excited for this report to publish because I believe that literally every founder should read it because I think that there is actionable perspective that no matter what industry you are in is important for every single startup to consider. And the reason I say that, regardless of whether you are building an AI company, I think it's really important to understand how many other companies are leveraging AI. One of the big themes in this report that we've been collaborating on is that, most experts, most folks on the cutting edge see AI as as a catalyst, as something to improve what you're already doing. It's not necessarily replacing your support team. It is just making your support team more efficient, more effective, more informed. If you are generating content, generative AI can help you write better, write more clearly, can help you, source interesting research and data points. I was talking with a founder a month or two ago who is using AI to help support nurses. So this founder, who himself is a doctor, was describing the number of steps that a nurse will go through when assisting in a surgery. And it was like a lot. He was describing to me the ones that really like have to be performed by a human, and then describing to me the ones that really do not need to be performed by a human. And it's, we need more medical professionals. And so if we can free up a nurse's time and headspace and bandwidth by letting AI take on some of that work that really does not need to be performed by a human, in some cases can actually be done better by an AI, that has the potential to improve outcomes, create more time and space for those who need medical care. So sort of coming back to why this is so important for all founders to understand, regardless of what industry you're in, it's really about leveraging AI to improve whatever it is that you are doing. And I think we are so fortunate here in Boston because I see this as a hub, if not the hub, for AI innovation. I mean, given MIT, Harvard, so many other great universities, it's no surprise that we're on the cutting edge. But almost every founder I speak with has some brilliant idea for how they can leverage AI to build better or build faster. So I'm excited about this report, and I'm excited about the potential for founders to think more broadly about how they might leverage AI. But in addition to that, we've also been working hard to support founder success around AI with content, other content, with events. We hosted an AI event last fall, and it was one of the most well attended events that we've hosted. The room was packed. We had a guest speaker from one of the fastest growing generative AI companies, speaking about what she has been seeing in this space. So ultimately, I think we're still early days with AI. So I see the most impactful opportunity, where I can be helpful, where Fidelity can be helpful, is just helping people understand what's going on, think about how they might leverage AI, learn about best practices that other founders and other operators are using so that they can think about how to grow their company more successfully.
I love it. I saw a really interesting post on X the other day, aka Twitter, and the way that I'm seeing a lot of entrepreneurs, like and it's like there's always good I've learned to appropriately pull away the right trends from like social media. I've become more of a lurker in my late 30s. But one thing I've seen a couple times, but it was a post of, I forget who the entrepreneur was, but they were like, and it was a pretty prominent like female entrepreneur, and she said, I spent $3,000 on AI tools in 2023 and it freed up X thousands of hours of my time to do all the things to generate success and create wealth for myself. And I think that that's like a really interesting way to look. I think I think that's how the report looks at it, is sort of how companies are, tools are being created right now, leveraging AI and machine learning to enhance the ability to more efficiently get certain tasks done. Like my creative team is using AI tools to take certain parts of the creative production process from 6 to 8 hours down to like 1 to 2. And so I think, you still need humans, but humans can get more done in less time. And as my friends at Scrum Inc. Have done lots of studies on, when you get more done in less time and you're enjoying, and it does help to enjoy what you're doing, you're less stressed, and that productivity output makes you happier. So I see AI as like real catalyst towards like happier workers, because that nurse, like the nurses you alluded to, that can help get assistance on some of the tasks that could be automated, and you could have sort of an AI assistant, and then the tasks that are the more mission critical, they can sort of like have their focus on, and then the backlog of things that they haven't gotten to for the day, they can actually go and get to.
Yeah.
And so that's really where I think similarly we share excitement for like folks reading this report and getting a sense of oh wow, like I can apply this to my entrepreneurial journey right away.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much opportunity to augment what you're doing, not to mention free up that time, which is any founder's most important asset to a certain degree, to focus on the human element, to build stronger relationships with their early customers, to build a great company culture, the things
Yeah.
that really like only a human can do for their startup and with their startup and their customers.
Yeah. Yeah, love it. So we just talked about AI. So I mean, if you really want to, it can be AI. But I'm curious, like, what else, like, is what most excites you about the startup community that you've been a part of for a long time here in Boston, and sort of this region? What are you most excited about this year, and sort of moving forward in 2024 and beyond?
Yeah. I love the way that this area focuses on some of our generation's most pressing problems in brilliant ways. So, as we touched on, like our area does really well with AI. Like we're at the cutting edge. We are also, of course, at the cutting edge, of life sciences, of pharma, of medical devices, of healthcare, which it is deeply important, as we saw during the
Yeah.
pandemic. And then in addition, Boston is at the cutting edge of climate tech and robotics as well. So here in
Yeah.
the Boston area, we have the largest climate tech incubator in North America, Greentown
Hmm.
Labs. And I end up over at Greentown Labs, once a month, if not more often. I'm actually teaching a workshop over
Oh,
there
cool.
in a couple of weeks. And I just love seeing what the founders there are building. They
Yeah.
are leveraging and building in solar. They are leveraging and building in wind technology.
Hmm.
They are improving battery technology, and all these things that they are working on have so much potential to impact our quality of life in really meaningful ways.
Hmm.
And ditto on the robotic side. There's often, a lot of overlap there, but we have some of the most exciting entities, whether they are accelerators, incubators, or VC firms, who are supporting the work that folks are doing in the robotics space.
Yeah.
So I'd say that, and again, like what we are able to do with robotics has so much potential to improve lives, improve medical outcomes. I love hearing about how people are thinking about using robotics in medicine, using robotics to install, solar panels. I was just hearing about that. So I think that like being on the cutting edge of climate tech, of robotics, of, life sciences and healthcare, all of those are, people here are building these businesses not just because they're trying to make a dollar, but because they really want to make the world a better place.
Yeah, I want to sort of talk about both of those topics a bit. Because previously, like the original report I did when I moved back from Los Angeles, I want to say it must have been 2019. I think it was before the pandemic. It might have been like 2019, maybe early 2020. We did a report on robotics, and we focused on micro location robotics because what we realized quickly, it was just such a big sector. Um, in order to have a digestible amount of research and reporting to get done in like 6 months, we had to focus on like a subset. So we just focused on micro location robotics, and the innovation from this Boston's sort of robotics industry on the micro location robotics front. It's basically driving all the innovation for like railway systems and transit systems like all around the globe. As just one takeaway from that report. To your point about healthcare and robotics, it's interesting. I have one of my best friends, a groomsman in my wedding. He's lived down in DC forever. Started his career. He's a patent and IP attorney. He used to work at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, but he now works for Medtronic. And Medtronic's got offices a lot of places, but he's been coming up to Boston recently because he's reassigned to the robotics department. And so Medtronic is very much invested heavily in robotics IP and robotics sort of enhancing sort of a lot of ways sort of medical and healthcare treatments are being administered, which I just discovered. You know, he was in town last week. We had dinner, and I'm kind of like setting up a follow-up chat because I'm like, oh, I want to learn more to the extent that he can share with me, like what's going on there. And then the last thing I want to double click on is I'm glad you brought up Greentown Labs. I mean, it must have been, several years ago now that I talked to Dr. Reichert, who just went into her new role. And I think strategically, I think that's going to help the overall ecosystem. She's obviously very, still embedded in Greentown Labs, sort of the recently now former CEO of Greentown. I've had some friends that have been entrepreneurs in that community, but a buddy that was doing wind turbine technology. I think it's an interesting area to like. I would love to put our analysts like on climate tech, and as I learned talking to Dr. Reichert, like, don't talk to me about like you can talk to me about green tech, you can talk to me about clean tech, but talk to me about climate tech. Talk to me about things that sort of like can be framed within sort of like helping reduce carbon emissions and positively impact the climate, and that's there's a lot of happening in this state that's driving sort of like global climate tech innovation, and it was cool to see them expand down to the Houston area, where obviously like a lot of dependency on oil is sort of tied to that part of our country. So let's throw climate tech on the list of potential topics we may cover in a future report.
Yes, I love it. With like an angle or a sub element there on blue tech. Like I think especially
Ooh,
being where we are, everything going on around Boston, Cape Cod, Portland, Maine, Rhode
yeah,
Island, like really cool stuff happening in blue tech specifically as
hmm
well. So yes, I like that idea,
yeah,
Zach.
yeah. Blue tech, I like it. Yeah, that's. I mean, and when you talk blue tech, you're kind of referencing sort of like the things that are going to help with sort of our rising sea levels and like flooding.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen
Yeah,
so many different founders doing really interesting things in blue tech. Like sometimes it's leveraging, like wave energy. Sometimes it's figuring out how to, generate wind power, but
yeah,
offshore.
yeah,
Sometimes it's about monitoring. I think arguably even there are innovations in like the shipping space that are
yeah,
sort of in this like overlap of operations and supply chain, but also blue tech because of the impact that the positive impact they're able to have on emissions and in other emissions reduction. So I think like that's what's so exciting to me, or like one of the many things that's so exciting to me about climate tech and about blue tech
yeah,
is all the different lenses through which people are thinking about innovating.
yeah, yeah. Well said. Totally. That's an area I would love for all the if every just badass sort of entrepreneur, growth agent, marketer, like CFO, like if it just was like I want to focus on supporting climate tech, blue tech sort of startups. I think there's a even greater That's the thing. There's such a greater ceiling to what innovation's happening out of the state, and I look forward to seeing sort of how Greentown Labs is like a catalyst for like more innovation and things sort of advancing toward like companies and startups out of Greentown Labs like generating revenues and becoming commercially viable and sort of paving the path toward like larger investments and more resources going to that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So one thing I want to ask you before we get towards like our fun final question is just I want to make like any other topics or things you want to bring up, and in particular, I'd love if you want to share with listeners like what are some things that are coming up, anything's happening in the coming weeks and months that that folks could attend, or whether it's virtually or IRL, but what's happening on the sort of Fidelity for Startups front that folks can tap into?
So I love fostering community in through a somewhat narrow lens, and the reason for that is I think that founders get so much benefit from talking with other founders. They get so much benefit with meeting and talking with investors. But I think the more closely aligned they are in terms of their industry, in terms of their stage, the better. They just have more in common. They're able to be more helpful in sharing lessons learned and best practices and introductions. So I tend to do a lot of community building that takes that somewhat narrow lens on industry. So next week, actually, we are hosting something around hardware and supply chain. We have some incredible founders and investors who are joining. And then in late February, I'm doing something around B2B SaaS. B2B SaaS has always been really strong here in the Boston area. So hosting something in the B2B SaaS space, as well as, a more sort of general tech and startup happy hour with a local law firm that specializes in IP law. So yes, I can share that link in case you want to share it, Zach, for all those upcoming events for folks who might want to join. But we are working hard to constantly bring people together, constantly create space for people to share lessons learned and data and trends, whether it's through programming like a talk, a report. And we curate everything through a link tree that people can subscribe to so they can always be kept up to date on new events that we are hosting and launching. So I'll share that so that folks can get visibility into future things going on, in addition to the AI report that we're publishing together. I'm super excited about. So, excited to think about what a launch event looks like for that.
Nice, cool. Yeah, so spoiler alert, there may be a launch event for that AI report too. Get me that link tree. I'll get that in the article. And is that also is that where people can sign up for like the newsletter and like get updates on things that are happening too? Get some push notifications on what's popping. Wonderful. So last question, your challenge for listeners and readers.
Yes. So I'm a huge reader. I've set this goal for myself in the past that like every year I want to read more books than I read the previous year. I think 2023, I was at 56 books. So, later in my life, I'm going to start regretting this decision or this goal potentially. But for now, it's been a fun goal. And one of the things that I really love doing, and I haven't always done this, but I've been doing more of it, and I found so much enjoyment from it, and so sort of figured others might as well, is really like reaching out to dear friends who also love reading to ask them like, hey, do you mind sharing like 2 or 3 things that you read recently that you really enjoyed? And that has been such an incredible source of suggestions. I've been, reading so many of the books that, friends and even like just sort of loose acquaintances have recommended. And I think perhaps the sort of cherry on top has been, it creates this lovely excuse or opportunity to like engage in sort of more meaningful dialogue with people that perhaps I don't even see very often.
Yeah.
There's a friend who because we live further away, like we haven't seen each other in a couple of years, but she just before the holidays shared a whole bunch of suggestions with me. Over the break, like I ended up reading a couple of books that she recommended. And so we ended up getting in a really nice, text
Nice.
dialogue about her opinion and my opinion. So I think that is my challenge to listeners is take a minute to text or ping some of the people in your life to ask if they've read anything recently, and take that book out of the library, buy that book from a local bookshop and give it a try, not only for the pleasure you get of reading a book that somebody recommended, but also for the opportunity to chat with those friends about their opinion and share yours.
I love it. I got a follow-up question on that. So fiction versus nonfiction, do you go through phases? Is it different seasons you tend to gravitate toward more? Just curious.
Yeah. I prefer fiction. I probably read like 80% fiction, 20% nonfiction.
Me too.
But yeah, I've been trying to read more nonfiction recently.
Yeah.
And last year I was on this kick where I was trying to read a lot of nonfiction around like decision making, habit building.
Cool.
I figured like life is long. Like I want to be good. I'm going to make a lot of decisions in my life. I want to
Yeah.
understand how I can improve my outcomes of every decision I make. How I can build the habits that will help me be as, healthy as possible, as happy as possible. So that was sort of the angle I was taking on the nonfiction side. And then on the fiction side, I've been working my way through the Modern Library's list of the 100 best books in English ever written. Recently completed Ulysses, which I've been trying to finish for literally decades. So that has been, I know.
That's good for you.
Reading a companion reader's guide while reading it helps. That's my pro tip there.
Okay, good to know because I have purchased it and I do have it. It's daunting. I've had more success reading fiction than nonfiction in terms of just like binging, but and just like getting in a flow. So I've just been on, I'd say I'm like 95% fiction to nonfiction in the last 2 years. But Ulysses is on the list. But I don't know if that whole 100, how far have you made it through the 100?
I'm at like 90. So
kidding
home
me?
stretch. Wow. Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Nice. Do you publish anything on like a Medium blog or something?
I do.
Like,
I actually, every January, I need to still do mine for 2023, but every January I publish a recap of the books that I read and then some of the themes that, came out of what I read that year.
Is that up? Because we can put that in with your challenge to listeners.
Oh, this is a good incentive for me. Now should publish my 2023 list. Okay.
Yeah,
over
the next week while we're getting this together. We'll throw it in there.
I'm into it. Thank you for the motivation,
Cool.
Zach.
Absolutely. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to encourage and be encouraged. If I'm anything, I'm excitable. That's as my brother described me in his best man speech for me. He's like, there's a lot of excitable people in the world. I don't know if there's one more excitable than Zach. If you find them, let's have they're probably pretty crazy.
That is a great attribute. One of the many things I admire about you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and appreciate like this, just our evolving, friendship, and looking forward to getting to see you at one or two of these events coming up, including, stay tuned, listeners, like an event sort of kind of unveiling and sharing more and building community around sort of the AI report and bringing folks together to kind of like discuss and sort of maybe make actionable like lessons and insights from that. So we got a lot more we'll be working on this year, and I'm sure into the future. So appreciate your embrace of me as sort of a friend and a sort of a collaborator in the market. So thank you very much.
It is my pleasure, Zach. Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers, Boston.
Cheers, Boston.